All right, guys, welcome back to the Josh Smith Show. Today, we're going to go over tariffs and some of the things that are happening with our current policies with our government and how it actually affects business. I don't think enough of this stuff is being talked about. I actually don't see really business owners being brought into the conversation that I'm aware of. It feels like sweeping policies, things are being enacted that aren't really truly being thought out or discussed with the impacts of business. And frankly, it's not really about tariffs. It's more about the nuance within tariffs. Like if you're going to put a policy into effect, there should be some nuance with any policy probably. So first of all, I want to start off by talking about who I support as a political party. So if you followed me at all, you know I was pretty adamantly in support of Donald Trump to be elected president. And I find it funny, like when I make posts on my Instagram page, I think you're doing things right when you're getting a little bit of hate from both sides, the extreme left, the extreme right. There's people out there that reply to my posts and they're like, see, this is why you should have voted for the left. This is why you should have voted for Kamala. You should have seen this coming. As if Kamala Harris or Joe Biden's administration was any better for American business at all. I argue they were horrendous. So you then get the right who it's MAGA all the way. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump says or does. It's MAGA all the way. Or they tell you, the Democrats would never do this. They support their candidate no matter what. You're fracturing the right. We got to stay together, blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, it's our job to question government, no matter what government is in charge. Okay, and that's how I believe we as citizens, that's our duty, that's our responsibility. It's to take all our information in, go vote, and then hold them accountable for what we voted for. There is no perfect administration, there's no perfect person, frankly, and I can't imagine how hard Donald Trump's job and the people that are working for him, how hard their job is. I truly believe that a ton of what Donald Trump's done in this first 6 months of an administration is phenomenal. A ton of the stuff on border security, a lot of the stuff with the economy, the trans, the putting kids on hormone blockers, and a lot of the stuff they're doing with like the sex change stuff, like just craziness. All that stuff, phenomenal. Kudos, great job, Donald Trump. Okay, but that doesn't mean that what they're doing is perfect. And I will say, in regards to tariffs and what Donald Trump's trying to do, I'm down for the big goal, the big picture, the overarching goal. And it's like seeing a mountaintop in the distance, and we all agree we want to get to that mountaintop. But there can be paths to get there that are easy or easier. There can be paths that we can all get there together in an easier way, or we can all get there, but it's going to be a really hard way of getting there. And we actually may lose some people along the way. And it's the losing people along the way that scares me. And maybe I'm not articulating this analogy well, but I don't think we have to lose anyone on the way to the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is American manufacturing. It's bringing back jobs, and it's revving up the engine of America. It's also being self-sufficient as a country where we don't have our defense, our military dependent on potential enemies for product like chips and whatever else, weapons. And so I agree with the overall strategy. The problem is with the strategy that's being enacted today is we are throwing out the baby out with the bathwater potentially. And we may cost some of our businesses here in America jobs or cost the business their entire business, and they may go bankrupt based on some policies. And I would argue, and I know for a fact, these are businesses that this administration appreciates and wants to stay in our country. And so I'm afraid with the policies that are happening right now, we're going to lose some businesses. We're going to have collateral damage, unintended consequences here. And so there's two parts of tariffs. There's tariffs on raw materials, and then there's tariffs on, finished goods. And finished goods could actually also account for equipment, okay, and equipment used in manufacturing. And there's two parts of this tariff thing that affect Montana Knife Company and what we are doing today. And I will say the idea of tariffs, I'm not an economist, so I can't sit here and argue from an economic standpoint the pluses and minuses of tariffs in general. I'm going to leave that to the experts, but I'll tell you my personal belief. I generally supported and still do the idea of tariffs and bringing back American manufacturing and using tariffs as a tool to accomplish that goal. Let's just take our knife company, for example, and our industry. I think it's a great place to potentially apply tariffs on finished goods. There are knives made in America. There's knives being made by us. There's knives being made by Benchmade, by Spyderco. There's a lot of American manufacturers out there, or manufacturers that are at least in part building their lines here in America. And so those American-made companies are competing against foreign, specifically Chinese-made knife companies for customers, for room on the shelf at stores. And that's a difficult fight to fight. And in fact, I was told in the beginning of starting Montana Knife Company that what I was embarking on was impossible. Okay, there's no way to make a hunting knife in America. The price you're going to have to, I mean, you can make it here, but you're never going to sell it. And the price that you're going to have to charge, people are never going to buy it, because you can buy, a similar knife, for $49 at Walmart, and we're going to have $300. And I argued, actually, they're not that similar, because we can provide better quality. We can provide way better customer service, faster shipping. And we actually are in our industry, in the hunt industry. We actually know that industry well. We're going to design better product for it. And so I argued that I felt there were enough Americans to support American manufacturing that we would sell knives. Okay, and proved to be right. We've grown a big business doing that specifically. But it's hard. It's difficult. And we are competing. Our $300 knives, $200 knives are competing against $19.99 knives hanging on an end cap at Walmart. Okay. So in my simple mind, tariffs make sense because you're not taking away an option for the consumer where they can't get that product anymore at all. Okay. If there were no knives made in America and we tariffed the crap out of those businesses, Americans wouldn't have another option, but they do. They can buy knives in America. Let's take the car industry, for example. Another place that I think tariffs potentially can be very beneficial for the car industry, the auto industry, where you can buy American-made cars in the U.S. So if you wanted tariff cars coming from, China or wherever else, Germany, in my mind, that makes sense. If we need that competitive advantage to compete against the cheap labor available in certain other countries, again, that makes sense to me. Okay, what doesn't make sense to me is when we start tariffing, and I'm going to say raw goods, okay? This is the situation that we're in today. Raw goods that you cannot source in America today, okay? Now, your immediate thing is going to be like, well, then we should make them in America, or that's why Trump is doing this. He's doing that to bring back that American manufacturing. Okay, well, I agree, and there's a way we could actually maybe potentially, with the government's help, bring back, say, like the steel industry. But I'm going to explain the story here a little bit for you of the knife steel industry and what's happening currently in it, and how I think the tariffs are unfairly punishing companies that actually are making product in America and want to make it in America. Okay, so Crucible Technologies, Crucible Steel Technologies out of New York, went bankrupt for a third time in January, actually just before that, but they were sold out of bankruptcy in January, right around Inauguration Day, to a European company out of Sweden, Steel. Now, Steel bought them out of bankruptcy, but they didn't really buy the steel company and then say, hey, we're foreign owned, like with Anheuser-Busch when they sold. Like, hey, we're buying Anheuser-Busch, but keep making beer in America. No, quite the opposite. They bought the IP. They bought the intellectual property. The facilities themselves, from what I understand, what I was told, I actually looked into trying to figure out to see, like, is there any way we can buy this when it was in bankruptcy? I was told the facilities themselves had such a lack of maintenance, they were in such disrepair, that it would be more efficient to start a steel mill in your backyard. And we know that would be extremely costly and take, a decade to get done, if you could even do it. And so, again, for the third time, they went bankrupt, and we somehow allowed a foreign company to come in and buy all the IP, the patents, the technology around this particular steel technology and take it to Europe. So it's gone from the US. And they use it's a powder technology where they atomize steel, they turn it into a powder. They make this powder, they put it all in a can. And it'd be like if you were to take a coffee grounds can of coffee grounds and heat it up and press it, and those coffee grounds became a solid, and you would have a solid block of coffee. That's how this steel is being made. And there's metallurgical advantages to that steel, which is why the knife industry is using it. It's superior. It's called a powder technology. I'm no metallurgist. I'm just skating on the edge of, I'm no economist. I'm no metallurgist. I'm just kind of a dummy trying to run a knife company. But that technology was all taken out of the US. That was the last place doing it. It's not being done anywhere. Okay, so here's what's interesting about Crucible. I actually listened to a clip. Aiden, we should find this clip of Harry Reid being interviewed and talking about Crucible Technologies in New York. And Harry Reid had gone and toured that place. And this is like 20 years ago. And Harry Reid sounded like Donald Trump back then, talking about trying to save the steel industry and blah, blah, blah. And in my home state of, New York, I'm at Crucible Technologies and we're trying to save steel mills like this. And I find it really funny because what that proves is that our government, right or left, have been talking about this for 30 plus years and watching the steel industry crumble the entire time. So I would argue the government is largely responsible for allowing the conditions on the ground to get to this point where that kind of a company goes bankrupt for a third time and disappears. Now, a free market person, a Dave Smith might argue, libertarian might argue, hey, government should be involved in any of this. Free markets, if they can't survive in the U.S., let it go. I would argue that there are absolutely arguments for government helping protect certain industries, again, frankly, for defense purposes, to not allow just everything to disappear overseas because it's cheaper to have it made over there. And so we lost 30 years after they had started really struggling. We lost Crucible Technologies to Aerosteel in Europe. All right, so this happened in January. Up until that point, Montana Knife Company was buying steel made entirely in America. Okay. And when we heard about this happening and then the tariffs coming and whatnot, we actually went and pre-purchased a bunch of their stock that they had at their company to basically get us through all the way through the first quarter of 2026. Okay. So we bought a lot of steel and we stored it to somewhat try to insulate ourselves from the craziness with this tariff thing going on, this bankruptcy, the sale. Like, we need to have steel to make knives. So we bought a bunch. All right. But that supply is not infinite. It's running down, right? And so here we are, we're in a situation where we need to start buying steel for the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter of next year of 26. It takes a lot of time to put these knives through a process. You have to, at a certain point, you can't wait any longer. You may run out of steel. But here's what's happening. That steel now coming out of Europe is being tariffed. But this is where I have a really big problem with the lack of nuance in these tariff policies. Our steel is actually being, quote unquote, made in Europe. However, it's the powder technology part where they're turning those coffee grounds into a block, solid block of steel or coffee. If you were to think of those coffee grounds becoming a solid in a 1 gallon can of coffee, And that 1 gallon can is being shipped to America, and it's actually being rolled into sheet form, into stock here in America. So that powder's created in Sweden. It's forged into a chunk. Again, imagine like that Yeti Go box over here on the floor. You might imagine a 1 foot thick by 2 foot long by 1 foot wide block of steel, and they ship it to the U.S. And there's a really cool company called Niagara Steel, and Niagara they're a rolling company. So they buy all different blocks of different alloys of steel, and they roll it for all kinds of different industries into sheet form. Okay. And so we place an order and we say, hey, we need a sheet of steel that's 150 thousandths thick. And it's, let's just say around 3/16 for people that are trying to figure out kind of like sizing, 3/16 or an 1/8 inch thick, something like that. And we want it 6 feet long and we want it 4 feet wide. And we're going to cut that into knife blades. Okay. Well, they have a 1 foot by 1 foot chunk of this steel. They will roll that into a sheet of steel, and they'll do all the annealing, processes on it to kind of relieve the stresses on that steel. And they do all that hot. And I've got video of that. And that's what Aiden's going to plug in here is these guys are working in this facility, which is, I think it's around 100 years old, Niagara Steel. And maybe Aiden, you can look that up. Correct me if I'm wrong. Look that up on the internet while you're working here. When Niagara was founded, but it's old. A lot of the equipment in there, you can tell is 60, 80 years old. 82? Oh, shit. Looks like it's older than that. Everything in there looks like it's 100 years old. Point at, okay, 43 years old. Okay. It's been around for a long time. I actually think a lot of that equipment in there is closer to 70, 80 years old. I'm not sure where it came from, but you can tell that stuff's much older than that. Their technologies, the old rolls and stuff, you can tell. So they may have taken over an older steel rolling, renamed it or something. But anyway, and you'll see on the video, this stuff is old, and it's not a automated process by any means. You've got this ancient old building, this old equipment, these huge furnaces, and they're heating these big blocks of steel up. And then these guys are dragging it out of the furnace and they're putting it on a forklift and they're running it over to a roll. And then they're rolling that steel back and forth through these huge, massive rolls, and they're creating these sheets of steel. And then once that's done, it's hot, it's dirty. It's really, truly what you just picture in your head, rolling steel at 2,500 degrees, big chunks of steel in it with dirty iron workers. Like that's what it looks like. They then take that steel, they actually grind that steel, they flatten it really well, and then they grind all that down. They get all the black scale, the nasty scale that you see on like blacksmithing steel off of it, and they grind it into a perfectly ground sheet of steel, and then that's ready for us to purchase. Okay, we purchase that, and then we start turning it into knife blades. What's crazy is the tariff on that raw good coming from Europe is now looking to be around 50% tariff on that steel. But this Niagara place still has to get that steel and roll it out and turn it into a sheet. And I think anybody that looks at this process with their own eyes, when you look at a finished knife and you see that steel being rolled in New York and then ground, polished up and then laser cut, all the heat treating, the grinding, the finishing process, the handles being made, everything, right? You would, I think we'd all agree that's pretty much 100% American made. However, there is that little piece of that first little stage that's happening overseas. Niagara Steel they have 100 tons of steel on order from Europe. What's crazy about the ups and downs of this tariff stuff right now is businesses can't plan. There's no stability. 1 minute there's a 10% tariff, then it's 15, then it's 30, then it's 50%, and it's all over the map. But we can only wait so long with this instability, and then we have to order. Well, they had to order. They ordered 100 tons of steel, and they're sitting there potentially going to pay a 50% tariff on that steel, but they still have to actually turn it into a usable sheet. When that steel comes in, it is not usable to anybody in this industry. They have to turn it into usable steel. Now, how does that affect us at Montana Knife Company? We printed it out right here. My director of operations, my supply chain manager went through all of our orders. And I'm just going to lay it out what the effect would have been. And this is at a 36% tariff, which it sounds like that is about 14% lower than what it is now. My email, I can actually pull this up right now, from this morning from Bob, says right now works out to about a 36% tariff. Will be now being hit with a 50% tariff on all European slab, which that's that big chunk. We've got 100 tons of material on order that will all get hit with this 50% tariff. All of our CPM supply is either gone or spoken for. So that's the supply that they had made before the bankruptcy. And again, these are the middlemen. They're not making the steel. They're rolling it. These are, just for background, these are the only suppliers of CPM type alloys that we can buy from. Ukraine, China are not options, which we wouldn't want that anyway. So trying to look down through here and see if there's anything else that's relevant. Aerosteel does everything in Sweden and ships us finished slabs. So we're already getting hit with the full tariff. We've got over 100 tons of on order from them. With all that, the point is this entire knife industry, it's not just a Montana Knife Company. I'm not here complaining as a company. I'm talking from an industry standpoint. The entire industry is being hit with this because this is the only supply of powder technology steel in the country. Okay. So, just a little, behind the scenes in the knife industry, like we're all buying our steel from the same places. Now there's different ways we heat treat it. There's different ways we grind it, different edge geometries, the things that make a good knife versus a poor knife, but we're all using the same supplier. Had we bought all of our steel last year with just a 36% tariff impact, last year we spent just shy of $1.7 million on steel alone. Okay. I'm just letting you behind the scenes. If there was a 36% tariff, if that had applied last year to this, we would have paid an additional $608,638.49 in tariff. $608,000. Okay. So you think of the impact on a company, when we ordered that steel for last year, we actually placed those orders the year before, the back half of 23 to supply 24. Then we bought all that steel in 24. And actually, let me look at the ordering dates. Okay, 4/1 of 24 to 4/1 of 25 is where we're sitting on that. Okay, so that's how much steel we bought. That's how much that tariff impact would have been, $608,000. I don't think anyone can argue, and you guys have seen what we've been doing, that we are doing everything we can to manufacture in America. It feels like these tariffs are actually working against our potential growth and against the goals of what this administration is actually trying to accomplish. These tariffs are not helping bring American manufacturing back. We are growing at a rate that probably no other outdoor company in the industry is growing at, but this slows growth. And this is the argument, and you could argue about taxes as well. And in fact, a lot of people think that tariffs are a form of tax. I'm not going to get into that. Either way, these kinds of things hinder growth. Okay, again, if you want to apply tariffs, Donald Trump, to all of Europe, do it on finished goods that are already manufacturable in the country already. Okay, doing it on raw goods I've heard from bullet manufacturers here in America, like with brass. Okay, when you tariff brass that they're getting in, and I don't know anything about brass. Maybe it can be made in America. Maybe it is being smelted or whatever, however they make brass in America. But the unfortunate fact is we've lost a lot of these industries over the last 30 years. And I would argue that that's the government's fault. But what's funny is now the pendulum swings all the way back, and the government wants to punish us as manufacturers for their crappy policies for the last 3 or 4 decades. Okay, you guys helped get us into this mess, whether it's through, free trade stuff or whatever the rules were. I don't care. Whatever the policies were that got us into this spot today, government has to own that. So in order to get us out of it, this is not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over years. If you want to build a steel manufacturing, company in America, that's great. I'm all for it, but that's going to take a decade. In fact, I made some calls when this bankruptcy was happening, and it was a really unfortunate time because it was during the transition in government period, that November to January timeframe where Biden was shitting his pants and going out and didn't know his own last name. And then Trump's coming in. He actually doesn't have any power yet. And when he took office, this sale had happened. Had this happened at a different time period, my thoughts were, well, maybe this is an example of where government could have come in, bought all that IPA, bought Crucible Steel out of bankruptcy, and then maybe partnered with another American steel company that makes other types of steel and help subsidize getting that manufacturing facility up to the standard, new technologies, whatever it is. And then when it becomes profitable, the government makes some of that money back, but helps save that industry and keep it in America. And I would even argue with the tariffs that are being collected today is like, what's happening with them? Where are they being spent? If you told me you were taking this $608,000 from us and the millions of dollars from the rest of the industry, and you were directly building a steel making facility, and it was going to be up and operational in 5 years, we might all be willing to take this one on the chin and say, hey, we're helping finance our own steel supply for 5 years from now. But I haven't heard of any steel companies being built right now by the government. So what's happening with this money is one thing I would ask. Okay, so that's steel. And that's just full disclosure. So you guys understand, come next year sometime, second quarter probably, like our steel and our blades is going to be coming from European source. And we may even have to add a disclaimer at that point on our website that says, hey, domestic, sourced from domestic and, global materials or whatever. Those global materials are going to be the first, 15% of the steel making operation, 20% of the steel making operation in Sweden. And again, I would argue we also we don't have to, but I think there's benefit in also supporting other economies that are our friends, right? Our allies. And I'm not talking through subsidies, through writing them checks, but I think it's okay for certain countries to do things well. People have always talked about, Japanese steel in chef's knives blades, in the samurai swords and stuff like that. They've talked about German engineering. We're actually going to get to that, to Germany here in just a second. Swiss steel in Switzerland or Sweden. I don't think any of the American consumers are really that bothered by Swiss steel. What we don't want is our enemies being supported. China, Russia, places like that. So let's actually get to Germany and where this second part of this, there's materials and then there's finished goods or equipment. Okay, we talked about finished goods with knives and cars and stuff like that. That makes sense. Equipment. We are building a 51,000 square foot manufacturing facility right now. And Aiden, I want you to put up video and stuff of some of that. Just, some B-roll of this building being built. We're hiring all local help to do that. It's all being made, that company's being built by Montanans, or that building is. It's Brandon and we are going out on a limb, and we're doing everything here in Montana. The steel building frame itself, they don't build those in Montana. Those came out of Utah. But it's all being erected by labor, electricians. These are locals in my town. 51,000 square foot manufacturing facility after starting this business in my garage during COVID. So we are on a rocket ship, and we are building American manufacturing. But when you build a building, you have to fill it with people and equipment. Okay, you need to purchase equipment, right? And so the reason we're building this building is there's certain processes today that we don't do in-house. When you start a company like this in your garage, you obviously aren't doing everything in-house yet. Okay, and my plan from the beginning was I'm going to start and mostly assembling, but I'm driving the quality that I want through the cutting process, the heat treat process, the grind. I'm calling out the hardness that I want of the steel, the toughness. I'm calling out the edge geometries, designs, all that stuff. Okay. So that's how it started. And then as I started growing and started making a little bit of money by bootstrapping this, I started bringing processes in-house. For example, handles. And you guys have all seen that. We've bought milling machines. I hired people to run those mills because I'm not that guy. I'm not that expert. I handmade my knives. And so by buying equipment like mills, it drove me to go hire machinists to run them. Okay. Well, now when you design a product, I was contracting out like engineer work. Well, now I need to hire engineers. So I've hired, I think, 4 actual full-blown engineers now. I have a manufacturing engineer, quality engineer, design engineer, and another design manufacturing engineer. That's 4. My other design guy has an engineering degree, and I have a guy that works in my shop he's actually in engineering school. That's 6. And I have an engineer tech who is working towards that as well. So basically 7, and I have, I think, 3 engineer postings open right now. So we're going to have 10 engineers in this building. Okay, that's all to drive into the manufacturing process. All right, so with this new building, we now want to bring in some of these processes we don't do. Laser cutting, maybe heat treat, blade grind specifically. All right, let's talk about blade grinding. Okay, forever I hand ground blades with, holding the blade, one blade at a time, hand grinding them. But that's why those knives were very, very expensive. It's hard to scale, and it's very difficult to teach. There's no way you can scale business and teach and make knives that way on the scale that we're doing it. So there's these machines called bevel grinders. There's 2 manufacturers of those. There's Seatman and there's Berger, and they're called bevel grinders. There's a few different models of them. They're massive pieces of equipment. They weigh thousands of pounds. And they're both manufacturers are being made in Germany. That's the only place on the planet. They're not made in Taiwan. They're not made in China. They're not made anywhere else. There's 2 manufacturers being done in Germany. And it takes that German engineering. It's fitting that those guys invented these machines. And these machines also are used in other industries to grind scissors, hatchets, dental tools, mower blades, blades for farmers. These bevel grinders grind all sorts of cutting instruments, okay? And knives is one of them. I have a quote right now for about just shy of $500,000 for one of those machines, which that's the barrier to entry, right? There's a reason we haven't bought one of those. You also need a ton of room, and they take a lot of 480 power, and they also take humans. It's an art form to get these things to run correctly and to work correctly. So what I found out this week is that we want to order one of those from Germany, but it's also subject to tariff and potentially this 30 to 50% tariff. So you now take a $400,000 machine that might cost you $600,000. Okay. To me, that's pure absolute insanity that those policies would affect manufacturing equipment. If I buy that grinder, it's going to come in here and it's going to generate millions of dollars of revenue for this company to then reinvest. It's also going to generate the need for me as the employer and the owner of the business to go hire several people to run that equipment. Okay. And probably another engineer to engineer the fixturing. The fixturing is what your blades actually go into. So if we have one design, say a speed goat, you got to design fixturing to hold that speed goat knife to grind it. Well, now we're going to grind a Blackfoot. I need more fixturing. Okay. I need a war goat. I need more fixturing. Every single knife requires fixturing. It's a massive undertaking. It takes engineers to design that fixturing. Guess what I now need? I need a guy to make my fixturing. Okay. We're going to have to buy the equipment. I'm buying a mill, a lathe, a wire EDM machine, all that to be able to make our own fixturing. Okay. When I now grind those blades in-house, guess what I have to do with those blades after they're ground? I have to finish them. I need a mass finishing process. I need tumble bowls, massive tumble bowls that can tumble thousands of blades to a finished look. Okay, guess what I'm going to need to buy what I'm going to need after I buy those tumbling bowls? I need people to run the tumbling process. Okay, I need several guys. If someone's gone on vacation, sick, whatever, I need expertise in tumbling. Okay, I probably need an engineer to figure out the media involved in those tumbling processes and what's it like to tumble a chef's knife blade versus a tiny pocket knife blade and everything in between. All right, these are the things I'm thinking about right now. Okay, now we've tumbled those blades, we dump them out on the on the bench. They have to travel from that tumbling process over to my laser marking process. I need people to move those blades across the shop. Okay, as you can see, and I'm only scratching the surface of all the things that I'm considering right now in this new building. We're looking into the laser process. That process requires nitrogen generation. Now I need a nitrogen generation station, or I have to have tanks that store liquid nitrogen on site and then pay expensive dollars to fill those nitrogen tanks. All right. Wire EDM process and all that goes with it. I need people to run that wire EDM to make that fixturing for that blade grinder. The point is, this is endless. I don't think you guys understand how much we are trying to figure out and build. And you can't just call your competitors that have been doing it for 50 years and say, how are you doing this? I am a guy that was standing on a power pole 5 years ago, and now I'm running this and trying to build this. And we don't know how to do it, but we're going to figure it the hell out, right? What I don't need is our government standing in my way. Okay, I need the government to enact policies that support me. Okay, punish the guy making the knives in Taiwan and in China. Punish that company. I'm fine with that. Now, I'm biased. You could argue that's not the right way to look at it. But I'm the guy making knives in America, Donald Trump. All right, don't punish me for making knives in America by tariffing my equipment and my steel supply. Tariff the guy that's doing absolutely jack shit in America and doing it overseas. That's called nuance in your policies. And that's what I'm asking for. I'm asking for you to bring in somebody like myself or someone else from the industry and explain these nuances that you guys clearly in government do not understand. So together we can reach the top of that mountain that we've been looking at without losing companies like Niagara that roll steel in between, or losing other small knife companies or bullet manufacturers or whatever. So that's an in-depth look, guys, into what tariffs mean for an actual business owner that's trying to bring American manufacturing back. And I'm doing it right in front of your eyes, and I'm just offering full disclosure. Okay. And I'm bringing the spreadsheets and the freaking proof to the table. All right. So that's all I've got to say about that. I can go off on an Instagram rant for 2 minutes, and I can't provide the nuance that I can provide here on my own podcast. There's really no secrets in what I'm doing. I'm sure our competitors will listen. How you doing, John Diassis? Nice to see you. Our competitors can know anything they want about us. They still can't stop us because we have the support of our customers and we're doing things the right way. Okay, you can sue us all you want. You can do whatever you want. We're not being stopped. What I don't need is Donald Trump and the government, in which I support, to stand in my way. And I don't even need their help. Okay, I want to be clear of that. I don't need the government's help to build my business. I started this under Joe freaking Biden. I don't need Donald Trump's help. I just need him to stay out of my way. All right, and if they want to get in the way of people doing it the wrong way and manufacturing overseas, be my guest. But I don't need you. I don't need you in the way of what we're trying to do, because we are trying to actually do what you, Donald Trump, say you want done in this country. All right. Thanks for listening.